Court. Oliver Patel covers UK politics and institutions at University College London, and he joins me now. Thanks for joining us. I mean, how significant is this ruling by the Scottish Court? I mean, on the face of it, misleading the Queen is pretty serious for a Prime Minister.
Well, yeah, it's an incredibly significant ruling. It's the first time a Prime Minister has been found by a court to have misled the sovereign. So it's incredibly significant and historical, and it seems like every single day or week in this Brexit process and saga, we have new constitutional history being made. So it's certainly a good time if you're into that kind of thing. So it's very significant and obviously...
I was going to say, but, I mean, and it is a but. I mean, the High Court in London ruled that it was a political matter, didn't it? And not one for the court. So we've had two totally contradictory judgments.
Yeah, so the Scottish legal system differs from the English legal system, but the Supreme Court, which will rule on Tuesday, will be the final say on this. So whatever the Supreme Court says on Tuesday, that will be it. So if the Supreme Court agrees with the Scottish Court and says that the prorogation was unlawful, then Parliament will return. It's impossible to predict what the Supreme Court will say, but at the moment you have, as you said, two contradictory judgments from the Scottish and the English courts, and the Supreme Court will have the final say.
Okay, I mean, and I know that the different legal systems, but how is it, do you think, that judges can come to such a different conclusion?
Well, personally, I don't think it's because there's been any sort of political interference or opinion. A few people are suggesting from the government have alluded that perhaps this is because the court in Scotland is biased. I don't think that's the case. I think that the judges were interpreting Scottish law and in the way that they should have done, and they found that the advice which the Prime Minister gave to the Sovereign, gave to the Queen, was justiciable, which meant that they were allowed to review it and see whether it was lawful, and that was different to what the English judges found. And the Scottish judges basically found that they inferred from the evidence presented to them that the Prime Minister had misled the Queen, and he actually intended to stymie or stifle the role of Parliament and prevent Parliament from holding the executive to account by proroguing it. So I think that it's just simply a matter of the Scottish judges interpreting their law in a proper way, and they found this to be unlawful, but we'll see what the Supreme Court says. But I think it's a very significant moment. I'm not sure how much it will change in terms of the actual Brexit process, because even if Parliament is returned, they've already passed the law which seeks to prevent or at least delay no deal. So I'm not sure what kind of material difference any of this will make, but it's certainly significant.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, what material difference it makes. Where does it, though, leave Boris Johnson, a Prime Minister who will then be, if the Supreme Court agrees with the Scottish Court, where does that leave the Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, it leaves him in a very strange position to have this sort of record as being the first Prime Minister to have been found to mislead the sovereign. Where it leaves him politically, I'm not convinced that there are many Boris Johnson supporters or Brexiteers that will change their mind because of any of this. I think that he is positioning himself as the champion of Brexit, and he's positioning himself as the man who's willing to do whatever it takes, do or die, to get the UK out of the EU by the 31st of October. And perhaps, counterintuitively, all of this merely strengthens that perception of him as willing to do whatever it takes to take the UK out of the EU. It might make some Conservative MPs very uncomfortable, and there might be a few more people in the Tory party who will think, well, can I stay in this party if this is the kind of behaviour that the Prime Minister is engaging in? But I'm not convinced that this is going to make any of his supporters in the public or Brexiteer supporters change their minds. So,
but constitutionally, Oliver, sorry to interrupt you, but constitutionally, does he then have to apologise to Parliament? Does he have to apologise to the Queen? Is there anything constitutionally he has to do, or are we completely, once again, in uncharted waters?
I think, well, I'm not sure what he has to do exactly, but what I do know is this whole episode and the Brexit process more broadly has really proven some of the pitfalls in not having a written or codified constitution. So quite often it's very difficult to say what he should or shouldn't do constitutionally, and that's why you have these battles in the courts to make rulings, because there isn't a written constitution which outlines in a document what the proper way of doing things are. So we don't even know whether this prorogation was lawful or not, because there wasn't a written constitution which outlines in detail the terms under which Parliament can be prorogued. So it's merely highlighted that maybe it is time for the UK to have a codified constitution. So we don't.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, is it time now that perhaps, it's time for a written constitution?
I think so. I mean, there aren't too many other mature, developed democracies without one, and it would be a way of. I mean, there have been so many things which have happened over the Brexit process over the past few years, where if there was a written constitution, you would have saved so much time and energy, and it would have been clearer what the position was. And let's not forget, this isn't the first time that the government has been in legal difficulties in the courts over its interpretation of what is the proper constitutional position. So we had the Miller case, where it was in the end ruled by the judges that the Parliament had to give its approval for the triggering of Article 50. That took many months for that to be clarified in the courts. And, perhaps if we had a written constitution, we would know exactly what the limits and bounds of the royal prerogative are, because we've seen this government and the previous government, Theresa May government, try and use the royal prerogative to get around Parliament quite a few times, and up until now they've been unsuccessful in doing so.
Yeah.
So we'll see on Tuesday whether that continues.
Okay, Oliver Patel, appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.